On Ollie here, and this is my review of Robot, the first story of the 12th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker in his first appearance as the 12th, sorry, as the fourth Doctor. Robot is the 75th story overall. It's 4 parts long and is written by Terence Dix. This is also the last story that is produced by Barry Letts, and this is also the last story where Terence Dix is the script editor. Philip Hinchcliffe will take over as the producer, as well as Robert Holmes taking over the script editing role in the following story, The Ark in Space. Previously, we saw the third Doctor regenerate after exposure to mass levels of radiation of the returning of the Metabelus crystals. Now we enter the fourth Doctor era, and the plot of Robot is as follows. Mortally weakened by the spider queen of Metabelus 3, the Doctor is forced to regenerate. His recuperation is cut short as unit investigates a spate of robberies involving components for a top-secret disintegrator gun. The culprit is quickly identified as a highly sophisticated robot built by Professor Kettlewell, which is being ordered to act against his prime directive. Just how is the robot being used to carry out the sinister agenda of the Scientific Reform Society? And can the Doctor rescue Sarah from the robot's clutches and avert a nuclear war? So, in my opinion, Robot is a brilliant story and it's a great way to kick off the Tom Baker era. And personally, I would say that Robot is probably a very underrated post regeneration story because it doesn't get a lot of praise as other regeneration stories like Spearhead, Power of the Daleks, even some of the new Who regenerate post regeneration stories. I think Robot does deserve to be mentioned amongst the very best because I think it's a brilliant story in my opinion. The production of the story was great. First off, we get a new title sequence, slightly modified from the one from season 11, but it retains most of the elements, such as the diamond logo, and this pretty much remains for the remainder of for a vast majority of the Tom Baker era up until they change it in Tom Baker's final season, season 18. So we still got a long way to go for that. The story is pretty much set on modern day Earth, and it feels very much like a Pertwee serial, considering that Barry Letts is still the showrunner and Unit is still over there, and obviously it had some location filming, and they used a new filming tactic which I actually rather liked. The visuals and the special effects are very good, especially the K1 robot. Harry pretty much grew to Godzilla's size. Even for 70s standards, it's still a spectacle to see, even though they did kind of muck up some elements, but it's still nice to see. And they still tried their best. I think an example of it being a bit obvious that wasn't very strong was the part when the K1 robot pretty much disintegrated the tank that the Brigadier sent, and it's pretty obvious that the tank was a toy tank that they used. But it was still quite good to see that they did try their best with it. Obviously, this is the 1970s. They don't have like the full scale budget of most TV productions they have nowadays. The script was great, nice dialogue was included, especially mostly from the fourth Doctor. The direction by Christopher Barry was great. Once again, he's out of his element because he usually directs some of the darker, more serious Doctor Who stories, and Robot was very light-hearted and quite comedic. The plot of the story was great as well. I can see the King Kong aspiration, like the K1 robot growing to Godzilla size and pretty much menacing over everyone, and how it carried Sarah Jane and placed her on the rooftops. And this story did have a bit of a James Bond element because of the Scientific Reform Society wanting to get the nuclear missiles and pretty much threaten the whole world. It was still, yeah, it was very much James Bond like, but if it was in Doctor Who, and obviously the ideas of the K1 robot developing Oedipus Complex was a good after killing Kettlewell was a good idea, even though the topic of the Oedipus Complex was a bit adult, and I think it is a bit adult because it does involve the Oedipus like killing his father and developing some incestuous feelings over his mother, but obviously this was heavily played down here because the K1 robot had a nervous breakdown after killing Kettlewell, its creator, and pretty much abducting Sarah Jane because she was the only one that actually showed it kindness. And so it was a good idea to include that sort of aspect into Doctor Who, and it was well thought of as well. Some very incredible moments which I actually enjoyed. One of my favorite scenes from Robot was when the new Doctor, was trying out his new clothes, and every time the Brigadier pretty much said no to the outfit, he looked very distressed. I actually felt bad for the Doctor because you can really tell from the sadness in his face, but it was still quite comedic in a way, and something of that kind of comes tradition in post generation stories, and Tom Baker really showed off his comedic chops here, and I really like that. Another bit I liked was when the K1 robot, how it grew to Godzilla size and was pretty much unleashing hell on units and everyone on the ground. I like how the robot pretty much grabbed one of the unit soldiers and just threw him to the ground, and I like how he stepped on another, just stomped on another soldier. It was just, it was quite gruesome to say the least, but it's still pretty cool to look at. So on to the acting of this story. And Tom Baker now takes over the reins as the Doctor, and he does a smashing job to say the least. As I mentioned before, Robot isn't a story that's considered to be like one of the best post generation stories, but I think it does deserve to be the best, mainly because of Tom Baker's performance. He really got some great scenes, such as the new outfit scene and how he pretty much hypnotized Harry into locking up in the closet by having him jump rope with him. And prior to that, he karate chopped a piece of block, and I really liked that. And I liked how the Doctor tried to do it again towards the end of the story, and he couldn't even do so. And he still saved the day despite being very goofy, and was showing some sense of seriousness. That's considering, especially, it was pretty obvious when the Doctor was trying to stop the nuclear missiles from launching in the nuclear bunker. He was just chatting away about computers, and then and then as the countdown was getting closer to zero, you can see the faces of Sarah Jane, the Brigadier, how they were all anxious, and then when the timer stopped reached two, the Doctor was able to stop it, and everyone was so relieved. So that's another example of how Tom Baker's Doctor is quite goofy, but at the same time he can mean a serious demeanor and save the day. And we do see him become more serious as season 12 actually progresses, and the following story, the arc in space, pretty much shows that, because his character pretty much does a complete 180 and is actually serious most of the time. And so Tom Baker definitely brought a new goofy side to the Doctor, and I believe that's what made him popular, and I think that's what made him last longer than any other Doctor. And I definitely think that season 12 has some of Tom Baker's best performances, this story included. And considering the fact that this is his very first story and his very first season, that's actually really rather incredible. Layden, she did a very good job as well. She definitely matched Tom Baker's energy later on, and I think she did a very good job adjusting to the Doctor's regeneration. She also played a huge part in the story, as she did some of her own investigations, especially when she came across Think Tank and Professor Kettlewell, and of course the Scientific Reform Society, and as well as becoming the person of affection of the K1 robot, especially with the whole Oedipus complex, and how obviously it started with showing affection to Sarah Jane because she was the only person that actually showed that kindness, as the Doctor did actually mention. And I actually liked how Sarah was able to develop some form of empathy towards the robot, and she was actually pretty nice to it. And we also have a new companion joining the ranks in this story, and his name is Harry Sullivan. He's a military doctor that got a mention in Planet of the Spiders. He's portrayed by Ian Marter, who previously appeared in Season 10's Carnival of Monsters. I really like Harry Sullivan. I think he's a very underrated companion. He does have some great moments, and this story included, I do think this is probably one of his best performances as Harry Sullivan. And then especially he does actually go undercover for Think Tank slash the Scientific Research Society and the Scientific Reform Society. Sarah describes him as old fashioned, and the way they pretty much bicker, they're the perfect duo. Sarah is the feminist girl from the 70s, and obviously you have Harry Sullivan, who's pretty much your old fashioned chauvinist, but obviously what he says to Sarah isn't actually out of spite, or he just says it jokingly, but they're the perfect duo because obviously they're solar opposites, and as they say, opposites attract, and the two actually do respect each other, and I really like that. And the unit family are back, and it's very clear that unit's days are pretty much numbered, as as hinted in the story when the doctor was during the unit briefing, and the doctor was like visibly sleeping, seeing that he was pretty much bored, and that was pretty much the writers saying that they were bored of the unit story set on Earth, and they pretty much wanted to go to other places, considering the fact the Doctor's no longer in exile, so that pretty much makes sense. The brig was great, and Nicholas Corney did a very good job, and I liked how he was able to take the Doctor's regeneration in stride and went along with it, considering the fact that he saw the Doctor's two previous incarnations. The scene where the Doctor was trying to deactivate the destructor codes countdown was probably the tensest I've ever seen the brig so far, and it was actually pretty funny. Benton was great as well, and he mentioned to Sarah that he got a promotion, so it's no longer Sergeant Benton, he's now RSM Benton. But he was promoted because of unit's budget, and I really like to think that he actually did deserve it, because he did do some very impressive things in the past few stories, like stopping General Finch invasion of the dinosaurs and other stuff as well. And I think he was able to take the Doctor's regeneration in stride as well, along with the Brigadier, and both of them really worked well with the new Doctor. There aren't a great deal of side characters in this story, and I like that because they didn't really need like a big cast to like show off this story. It was just what it needed. Just a small cast to try and settle Tom Baker into the role, and a small story to settle Tom Baker into the role, and it really helped. The other non-villainous side character was Professor Kettlewell. He specialized in robotics and worked with Think Tank to develop the K1 robot, but he left because he didn't like the direction he was going. And he was also a member of the SRS and initially betrayed Sarah Jane and UNIT by aligning himself with them. And but he saw the dangers of what they were doing, and he tried to get away from that. He almost got away, but the K1 robot accidentally killed him, and then obviously which that led to the K1 robot having a breakdown when it made him go insane. He was a very good character, and Edward Burnham played him very well. And I actually find it funny because he played another professor back in Doctor Who, especially in the Patrick Charlton story, The Invasion. So he plays two professors. Villains of the story, well, there were actually three villains. When there were the first two main villains were the big was Miss Winters and Jellicoe. Hilda Winters, or Miss Winters, was the big bad of the story, and she, along with Jellicoe, were members of the SRS, the Scientific Reform Society, and they pretty much wanted to take over the Earth with the use of the nuclear missiles to try and start a nuclear war, or by trying to like blackmail the main governments in power to achieve their goals. Patricia Maynard played Miss Winters very well, and I would say she's the hammiest scene chewing villainous Doctor Who has actually had up to this point. The Queen Spider from the previous story takes a very close second. During and it was pretty obvious, especially in the SRS meeting, and she was pretty much just yelling her lines, and that was pretty awesome to say the least. I don't think there's ever been a female villain that's actually done this in Doctor Who, or even after the story. I don't think there's a female villain that's actually done something like this as well. I mean, Missy would in New Who will come in a very close second, but I don't think she's as hammy as Miss Winters was. Jellicoe was Winters' assistant, and he didn't really do much. The other villain was the K1 robot, made by Kettlewell with the assistance of Think Tank / the Scientific Reform Society. Initially harmless, but became very deadly thanks to the disintegrator gun, and obviously Miss Winter was able to change its prime directive by destroying members of the human race. Yes, and it became distressed and wanted to carry out Kettlewell's initial plans because it thought Kettlewell actually wanted to release the codes and set off the nuclear war, but he actually changed his mind, and Sarah pretty much was telling the K1 robot that he changed his mind, but obviously the robot wouldn't actually listen. It was destroyed by the metal virus that the Doctor had created from what Kettlewell had actually left around in his books. But I would say the K1 robot was more of an anti-villain compared more was it? Oh, yeah, he was more of an anti-villain more so than the other villain compared to Hilda Winter, to say the least, because it was only distressed after they killed its daddy in Kettlewell and pretty much took it to frustrations out in unit and pretty much wanted to protect Sarah Jane as well. And the robot is a good character, and I really like the character model of it. I remember when the classic Who figures were released, like in 2008, 2000s or so, late 2000s, I think. I think they had like the fourth, fifth, and sixth Doctors were released along with some enemies. I think the Ice Warriors was released, and along with I think one of the robots from Robots of Death were released as well, and obviously they came with like collecting build, and obviously the collecting build figure was the K1 robot, and it was pretty cool as well. The thoughts I have of the story is how Miss Winters and the rest of the SRS were dealt with in part 4. After the unit stormed into the bunker, they were arrested and they later escaped because I think it was implied that obviously they were trying to like get everyone out of the bunker. They pretty much just escaped and they were never mentioned again. I do think they could have come up with a better ending for the SRS lot, but I think Miss Winter does return for some big finish stories, especially the ones with Sarah Jane. So to conclude this review, Robot kicks off a very iconic era of Doctor Who and ends another era such as the producing editing team of Let's and Dex. The future of Doctor Who is looking very bright at this point, and I'm very excited to review the rest of the Tom Baker era. So I gave A Robot a very good and a very well deserved 9 out of 10. My next review will be The Ark in Space, so look out for that. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of Robots and this review. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and feel free to join my Discord server. There are only 2 members that are there, so please make yourself at home when you actually do join, and the link is in the description below. Until then, see you later.